Hi everyone, got a nice beach scene today. So what I've done is I've flipped it portrait. I've got a shorter amount of trees here, so I've kept it quite high up, and then I've brought the beach down, and then the wave, we've done this before with a picture, I've brought it slightly in this way towards this corner, just so it gives a better sense of distance and perspective. So it's quite a loose line drawing. If you can make sure you get some of these lighter lines in with a pencil for the tree trunks, because we're going to make sure that we do those in the first stage of the sky. Okay, so what I've then done is taken some masking fluid at the bottom. So where I've got these white, little bits of white, I've just popped some of those into the water. You can be quite loose with the masking fluid. You can always fill it in later anyway. Okay, colours wise, I've got Naples yellow. If you haven't got Naples yellow, use raw sienna. I've got dioxazine violet or Windsor violet, quite light, intense blue, cobalt blue, and then I've got the dark green, which is made with intense blue and burnt sienna. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is come over the sky. I'm coming right the way down to the horizon, so I'm coming over the tree line. So I shall come down to the bottom of the tree line here. What I'm going to do is pop on a little bit of gum arabic where the trees are. So mainly this side, because I want to be able to lift out, but you can take a little bit along that tree line as well. Make sure you give your wash brush a good rinse after, so you don't end up carrying it along. Okay, so I'm going to start with the cobalt blue and just sweep that in, nice and light. So this is coming across at the bottom, and I'm looking at the lighter areas of the picture. These are all watered down to what I would class as a medium consistency. So good for skies, good for wet in wet. Take a bit through behind these trees. I'll brush a bit of a rinse, and I'm going to come into the intense blue, which needs to be darker. And again, just sweep through. There's not much in terms of cloud, it's just a really nice, pleasant summer sky. If you can leave some little bits showing through as white or light cobalt blue, that will work really nicely. And then don't mess with it too much as well. Temptation to fiddle. Let the colour do its thing. With the intense blue, it tends to shoot a bit, but that can work quite nicely. Then I'm just going to take a little bit of the violet. You need it to be strong enough to show, but not too strong to be stormy, just towards the top section. Okay, I'm going to give that rinse off. Right, so I'm on my round number 10. Make sure they haven't got too much on the brush. I'm just going to pick up a tiny bit of Naples yellow. I'm using Naples yellow. You can use raw sienna if you haven't got Naples yellow. I'm just going to bring it towards that bottom section there. So just where the trees are coming into the sand. Dry my brush off well. I'm going to dip into the intense blue and green mix. Right, so I'm going to come on now and start to dab this in. Now I've chosen a section where I don't mind if it shoots a little bit. Ideally I need it to be perfect consistency to come on and not spread. It's shooting a little bit. It's fine at the minute for it to shoot. We're going to lift these other tree trunks out, and that's why we've used the gum arabic, so that it lifts easier. The gum arabic should also stop the flow of paint. So I don't mind it being a little bit spidery. We're going to come over this later anyway. Okay, so I'm just pushing the brush down as I go and lifting up in the middle. So as long as you don't lift up whilst you're on that section, then it shouldn't flow as much, because as you lift up all the paint runs out the brush, if that makes sense. So where you press down hardest, it will not move, which you think is counterproductive, but it does work. So I'm getting the shapes in there. So I'm just dabbing off a little bit on kitchen towel just to stop that spreading too much there. So I've taken a little bit of the water out, taking a little bit more paint in. I'm going to come along this line, which is very nearly dry, so this should work better. So I'm just checking that nothing looks a bit too spidery, and then I'm going to dry off. Okay, so I'm going to dry that one off quickly. Okay, so that's dried off now. So the first thing I've done is I've come along this bottom edge, because remember some of this will have gum arabic on, so it will lift quite nicely, and I'm just creating a bit of a nicer edge. So this is just water, and I've just, with my round number 10, painted along, and I've just created a nicer edge there. And then the other thing that I want to do, I'm going to twizzle round, because I find it easier to paint downwards, is to paint these trunks in. So again, this is water, and you just want an impression of these tree trunks. The finer you can get it, the better. So I'm just painting on with water. And there's some lighter bits, some fallen over bits down here. I'll pop in. And then if I just dab because of the gum Arabic, this should all lift nicely without too much effort. So you can just do a few more if you want them. Turn back round. Okay, I'm going to dab back into the darker green and just come in to create a little bit of extra depth just along this section. So I've got, then it's just given me an extra bit of depth. Something to work to. This goes up quite high here. The temptation is to fiddle loads, but I want you to resist that temptation. So I'm trying to leave a little bit of those branches showing that want to come along to there. And then just break in. So this is with the rigger or your line writer. I just want you to break into this sandy section. So this is all the bits that are growing through, but it's also doing another job, which is grounding it all. And you can do a little bit at the top if you want to break through that a little bit. As it dries, you won't notice it as much as being that different. Okay. Okay, so you want a nice clean brush now. You're going to come on and do the beach area. You can just let that other one dry as it's going, because we're not going to come straight the way up to that green section anyway. So you come to the water's edge. Make sure your brush is nice and clean. You're going to sweep on some Naples yellow to start with. And come into this water's edge. So to make a nice shadow colour now, we're going to use the violet. So because yellow, Naples yellow and violet are complementary colours, that should make a nice shadow colour. What you just got to be careful of is that you don't take too much violet into the mix. So keep it nice and watery, because your Naples yellow is nice and light. I'm going to sweep in some shadow. I've got some very faint lines as to where the shadow is. if you can try and keep horizontal strokes, what you'll find is that works so much better as a surface of the beach. And if you can run some of that shadow colour all the way down where your wave is coming, and then just come back out from there, that will work quite nicely as well. Just going to twizzle a little bit just so I can see it, because it's a bit harder with the camera tripod in the way. So you need to make sure that you're not ending up with any very obvious purple stripes. I'm just going to grab a little bit of sepia that I've got left on my palette. So it just needs some darker bits just in places, and just run that through. One of those things where it just needs a little bit more warmth, and this is just going to add it. You still need to keep a few light bits of the Naples yellow though. At this point you could do a little bit of splattering. I'm going to err away from splattering today. Okay, I'm going to dry that off. Okay, so I'm coming onto the water now. So I've dried the beach area off. What I've done is I've mixed up a grey as well with cobalt blue and burnt sienna. So I've got a bit of a grey here. Plenty of water on the water because you're going to need to take your time. So round number 10, I'm going to come in first of all with some cobalt blue. Especially in these lighter areas. As you come further down it gets browner and greyer into the intense blue, and take a little bit of that up here. Again, it's more horizontal strokes. Try and brush off into the violet. The violet's more towards the top. I'm going to take a little bit of the raw sienna through at the bottom. Don't worry too much if it mixes with the blue, because you're going to come on with a violet and that'll make it quite grey anyway. Then you're going to come in with a little bit of the violet. What I'm trying to do is replicate some of the colour that you're seeing in the beach, because the sand would show through. in this front section, and we'll also take a little bit of that sepia that we've had in that front section as well. And then I'm going to come into my grey. Right, at this stage I just want you to get a bit in. We're going to worry about the waves appearing after this, the waves of colour. So it's all about just horizontal strokes and getting some of that grey in as a base. Okay, so I'm going to sweep through now. Just start to create some of the waves. We're going to do this in 2 sections, so don't feel you've got to do it all in one go. Just capturing some of the waves in a soft way. And I'm just using the grey. Just going to get a nice edge happening here. So just look, the last thing to do is just look at your edges. I'm just going to get a tiny bit of cobalt blue. It's very easy to get lost and not get a good edge on the beach. So if you come over, that doesn't matter because it's going to give it a sense of shadow, but it needs to flow. So sometimes you're better to come over and create an extra bit so that it flows, because that will work as a shadow or wet sand. That's working nicely. Okay, I'll dry that off. Okay, so I've dried that off. Then what I've done is I've come in with a bit of the grey and I've come along the edge. So I've come along the edge, then I've popped a little bit of water to the left hand side, and this is to create a shadow appearing. You don't need to do too far up here, but definitely along this bit here, and what you'll find is the shadow starts to appear. So I painted a line first, putting it on to dry, then I've popped some water on to soften that in, and then I've just added a little bit extra there just to help that along. And then I'm going to pop quite loosely, again this is some of the grey. Try not to think about it too much, you want random. So I've got 2 lines happening there, so you can just squiggle on. And then once you've got those squiggles on, I want you to dab with water in places. It really is that random, and it's just going to give you that little bit of extra texture on there that we need for that to hold together better as a beach and sand. Again, you can take a few little bits. This is all random dabbing. And this is my grey. You could use a little bit of sepia. And then a little bit of water. That's just giving me some texture on the beach. I'll dry that off and then we'll go back onto the waves. If you just want to pop a couple of dots of sepia in as well, so this is dry now, and I've just come on to create a couple of dots of sepia where I've got these little tiny rocks on the beach. In fact, I'll do another one just so you get to see the whole process. Just put a couple of bigger ones down here. Temptation is to do lots, and if you're not careful they end up looking like slugs. You're just going to soften them in with a little bit of water. Okay, so we're going to get on to the water now. So I'm going to use some intense blue, but it's the same consistency, I'm just going on to dry. So this is with my round number 10. I'm going to start to create some waves in the background. There isn't a huge amount for you to see in the background, so that's why it's easier to start at the back and work forward. At any point if you want to stop and dry, stand back and have a look, you can do. This is mainly coming over the intense blue section, so it shouldn't be what I would class as too stripy. You don't want it to end up looking stripy. What you've got is the softer waves underneath. If you vary the pressure of the brush, you should find them quite easy to create. As we come down, we're going to go into some grey. Just make sure I've got enough mixed up here. You can flip some of the grey through so you get that blend, so it doesn't just all of a sudden go from one colour to the other. And remember, keep it quite light, you don't want stripy. So concentrate on getting the top of some of these waves first, and then you can just soften in underneath, because these are bigger ones, so you don't want them all to be hard. You can touch bits of water in at the top as well. It's getting a balance of hard and soft. I'm going to come down this section. Try remember horizontal strokes work better. So some of this is still wet, so it's softening in nicely anyway. Just dampening some of that in. The masking fluid is all still on there. That's going to give a nice surface. Bring some of that water through there. nearly there. Okay, that's plenty. I'll dry that off. Take the masking. Okay, so I've rubbed my masking fluid off now, it's dry. I'm just going to come in and just define a couple of these waves at the front. So this is just grey coming on. I'm avoiding the bits of white masking fluid because I want those to still stand out. Just want to give it a little bit more definition at this front section. So this is a little bit of extra shadow, and that will just hold it together nicely. Just take an extra bit of shadow in there. Okay, and then I'm just going to dab some water on that brush with a grey, and just making sure it's really watery grey. Just bring a little bit of that through so that it's not just all a big chunk of white. I want the white to still show, but not too much. And then I rinse the brush out and just dab in so I've got some hard and soft edges. Okay, so I've just got to dry that off and we're done for today. Hope you've enjoyed it. See you next week.